perfect episode for me is always an episode that not only is structurally brilliant in terms of setting up the premise of an episode, the emotional beats the story should organically hit, and the character arcs that characters featured in the episode should experience, it should also tackle its themes and subject matter with an air of competency and relatability. When I think of a perfect episode, I think Advanced Dungeons & Dragons from Community Season 2 Episode 14, an episode that brilliantly uses the concept of Dungeons & Dragons to pay tribute to the fantasy genre of film and television, as well as nerd culture in general, which creates an emotionally gripping narrative and sets up character conflicts and arcs for the rest of the season to pay off. Or Breaking Bad Season 5 Episode 14 Ozymandias, an episode that flips the entire show on its head with the ramifications of its events that serves as a turning point for not only the show, but for the character of Walter White specifically. Not to mention its brilliant visual storytelling and symbolism that stems from director Rian Johnson's outstanding direction. These two episodes, among a few others, serves as probably my standard for what a perfect episode looks like, and Sex Education Season 1 Episode 3 is among them, at least in my humble opinion. But to better understand why I hold this episode, and by extension this show, to such a high degree, I want to first introduce the show, Sex Education. What it is, why I love the show so much, and why it's probably among the best Netflix original shows currently airing today. Don't worry, I'm not gonna do a tired and extremely drawn out overview of the show, nor will I spoil the events of it for those who haven't seen it yet, at least for this segment of the video. I'm just gonna name some of the things that I love about this show to give you guys more context as to how I came to love it so much. Sex Education is a Netflix original show created by Laurie Nunn that stars Asa Butterfield, Emma Mackey, and Gillian Anderson. The show is a coming-of-age love comedy about teenagers in high school, the most accepting and all-inclusive time period for every person ever in the history of ever. And no, I am not being sarcastic in any way, shape, or form. I know this, you know this, let's move on. That's the most basic premise of the show. And just based on my description, you might be inclined to think that it's just another one of those cliched coming-of-age stories set in high school that has oversaturated pop culture today. But I assure you, it most certainly isn't. There's a lot of things to like about the show. It has quirky and likable characters for both the main cast and the supporting and recurring characters, as well as a pretty colorful and stylized world. It's a show that is set in modern times but has an appealing 80s and 90s aesthetic. From the clothes to the look of the show, the world feels just as quirky and interesting as the characters inhabiting them. For a comedy show, it's an extremely funny show. The way the show balances its witty and absurdist humor with the more emotional and heartfelt moments always works and never feels too trying or forced. The relationships in the show, both romantic and platonic, are some of the best I've ever seen. The relationships the main character Otis forms are especially noteworthy. From his romantic interactions with Maeve, that I feel is one of the stronger romantic pairings in pop culture today, to his more complicated but still loving relationship with his sex therapist mom, and even his intimate friendship with Eric, is also great. The writing and the way it utilizes the principle of Chekhov's gun so beautifully is something that always impresses me as well. But I think the best thing the show needs to be commended on is the way it handles its themes and heavy subject matter. Something that is a direct contributing factor in why I consider Season 1 Episode 3 of Sex Education to be a perfect episode. But now that I've at least given you some context as to why I love the show so much, let's get down to the meat and potatoes of the video. Meat and potatoes. 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 Let's break down Season 1 Episode 3 of Sex Education and see the various aspects that make it a perfect episode in Monogon. If you break down episode 3 of Sex Education to a basic structure, you get a well-rounded episode that follows a pretty simple but effective format. For example, let's compare the episode structure to Dan Harmon's Story Circle. You may or may not know him as the creator of Community, one of the best sitcoms of all time, and also the co-creator of Rick and Morty, a show infamous for its toxic fandoms. So the Story Circle is a literary device he uses to develop the plot to his stories. It is basically Dan Harmon's take on the classic hero's journey first proposed by American literature professor Joseph John Campbell. The Story Circle breaks down a story into 8 parts that form, well, you know, a circle. And if we apply this to the episode, it follows the story structure pretty closely. Part 1 of the story circle, as Harmon describes it, is the introduction to the characters and their comfort zones. This is pretty self-explanatory. I don't think I need to elaborate on this. We get introduced to our main characters, Maeve, Otis, and Eric. Part 2 is about showing what the characters want. For Maeve, this is when we learn about the fact that she's getting an abortion and needs someone to pick her up after the operation. For Eric, this is him trying to find his interest outside of just hanging out with Otis, since as of late he has been busy spending more time with Maeve and neglecting Eric as a result. And for Otis, it's all about not knowing how to feel and act around Maeve because of him having a wet dream about her. Part 3 is when they enter an unfamiliar situation. For Maeve's case, this is when she's in the abortion clinic and meets Sarah, a seemingly insensitive abortion patient that at first is portrayed as tough and unaffected by the situation, but as it is later revealed, is just putting on a front to hide her real emotions. In Eric's case, this is when he auditions for swing band and meets Lily, who tries to have sex with him, not knowing he's gay. For Otis, this is when he finds out about Maeve's abortion and had to wait alongside an abortion protesting couple who has their own issues to resolve. Part 4 is adapting to the unfamiliar situation. Maeve is reluctantly approached by Sarah and gets to know her and bond with her. She becomes a person that helps and guides Maeve through the difficult process she has to go through. For Eric's case, he clears up the misunderstanding and befriends Lily. Otis, on the other hand, learns about the protesting couple's issues, seeing as he had to reluctantly interact with them. Part 5 is about getting what the characters want. Maeve successfully gets an abortion. Eric, for the first time in the episode, is doing something he actually enjoys when he and Lily dress up and watch gay porn together, which I know. Who doesn't like watching porn, am I right? Anyways, for Otis, this is when he fixes the protesting couple's relationship and he gets some reassurance about his situation with Maeve because of it. Part 6 is when the characters have to pay a heavy price for getting what they want. Maeve got her abortion, but she still feels conflicted about her decision to do so. Eric's dad walks in on Eric and Lily and is massively disappointed in his son. Otis helps fix the protesting couple's relationship and asks for them to not attack Maeve when they get out, but they comically refuse. Part 7 is about returning to their familiar situation. For Maeve and Otis, this is the moment when Maeve is leaving the clinic, fully expecting Otis to not be there because of her telling him off earlier in the episode, but she is greeted with a pleasant surprise when she finds out that Otis actually waited for her. Otis walks her home and they spend the trip talking and sharing personal anecdotes. Maeve even trusted Otis enough to share her familiar situation with him, which is something very personal and dear to her. Otis also doesn't feel awkward hanging out with Maeve anymore and has completely forgotten about his guilt over having a wet dream about her. In Eric's case, this is when he goes to Otis's room to hang out. Part 8 is an extension of Part 7. This is the part where the characters return to their familiar situation, having changed. Maeve deals with her conflicted feelings and accepts her decision of abortion. She also realizes that Otis is someone that will always be there for her, a true friend, which is significant because this becomes the first step into her eventual forming of romantic feelings for Otis. Eric still has lingering feelings of being left out because of Otis and Maeve's continued interaction with each other, a plot point that he deals with throughout the rest of the season. And for Otis, this is when he finally accepts his feelings for Maeve and is no longer unsure how to feel around her. That's the episode when you break it down using Dan Harmon's story circle, and in my opinion it works tremendously well. Not only is the episode easier to digest, especially with the heavy theme they chose to center the episode around, but it also helps establish the characters and their arcs throughout the season. We get to see each character shine and show what makes them likable, and the rest of the episode is either a good character moment for the supporting characters or a setup for the larger narrative of the season. The episode from a writing and technical standpoint is already fantastic in and of itself, but even if we move away from the writing and technical aspect of the episode and focus more on the substance and themes, it also covers that front freakishly well. The show has never been afraid to tackle heavy themes and subject matter, from bullying to revenge porn and sexual assault to even mental health. And the show has oftentimes handled these topics in a respectful manner, unlike some other show on Netflix, which I will not be naming. But you know who you are. Episode 5 of Season 1 and Amy's Season 2 arc are some of the more standout examples of this, among a few others of course. But I think by far the heaviest subject matter the show has ever tackled is seen here in Episode 3. Abortion. And what I really enjoyed about the way they handled this topic in this episode is the fact that it felt organic and natural, and they at least tried to be objective when it came to presenting the controversial topic at hand, or at least provide perspective on both sides of the argument. The reason why I think this way is because the show never vilified a side. It never felt to me like the show was pushing an agenda with this episode, that it was biased and was close-minded when it came to the topic at hand, because it's so easy to be biased and have that translate into your work. But the episode never went that route. The protesting couple outside the clinic weren't foul-mouthed evil mongrels that hate everything and everyone. Sure, they were stubborn with their beliefs, but who isn't really? When Otis, after learning about Maeve's abortion, exited the clinic, the couple were hospitable with him, even though he had a completely opposite belief from them. They offered him a place to sit and were generally nice to him, apart from a few snide remarks, but they were never really vilified. In fact, I could even argue they were sympathized with. We got to see in general how they were treated from their perspective. They are humans with human problems just like the rest of us. They were a couple with their own issues that Otis's rare and very specific skills had helped resolve. Plus, at the end of the episode, they weren't changed individuals that questioned their own beliefs and were now on the right side of the argument. Sure, they're a better couple now, but they still believe in what they believe in. That hasn't changed. And when it came time to the actual abortion, they also handled it really well in my opinion. Now, as you can probably tell, I'm not a female. I can't exactly relate to how it feels to have to make that decision, because last I checked, I'm physically incapable of being pregnant unless modern science has evolved enough to make that possible, in which case I redact my statement. But I would imagine that decision to abort a child is a tough one to make, no matter what side of the argument you're on. But personally speaking, I feel like the episode did a great job of showing that moral dilemma so that even viewers like me who have not experienced it and probably never will can still relate to it and understand it to a degree. There's some subtle hints in the prior episodes before this that show the character of Maeve actually considering all her options. In episode 2, we see her reading a book about pregnancy. This suggests that she's taking this decision seriously. It's not just a spur-of-the-moment thing where her first instinct after learning about her pregnancy was to get an abortion. She weighed all her options and took her time to make the best possible decision she could. And even then, the guilt still weighed on her after the fact. But in her situation, she had no other options. She's a high school student living in a trailer park home, alone, without any parental figure of any kind. She's financially challenged with her main source of income coming from a sketchy and morally questionable high school sex clinic in which a wankingly challenged 16-year-old is the one administering the therapy. And she also does homeworks. There's no way she could have raised a child in an even acceptable environment. And this is where the character of Sarah comes in. She becomes Maeve's emotional anchor, a character that has gone through the same experience before and helps Maeve get through it as well. This is the show's best one-off character because of just how well they handled her and what she meant for Maeve. Seeing her tough and unapologetic behavior crumble as we get closer and closer towards the operation was touching to watch, and seeing her breakdown after was emotional and heartfelt. And her advice to Maeve was honestly great. Seeing how the show handles its themes is something a lot of other shows should strive to replicate. It never ever feels like the show is pushing an agenda, and it always presents both sides of an argument. It never doubles down or vilifies one side, and it's one of the few shows that does feminism right. It's not in your face, but also not so subtle that it's barely noticeable. Sex Education is a show that handles its themes and heavy subject matter respectfully well, and episode 3 of Sex Education is the best example of this. Asa Butterfield has always been an actor I've really liked since even before watching this show. Ever since I first saw him in Ender's Game. I mean, I really enjoyed the space between us even though the majority of people really didn't, but I still liked it, and Asa Butterfield was definitely a major reason why. Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children was a mess, but Butterfield was one of the reasons why I could tolerate the film to the point where I could at the very least finish it. And Slaughterhouse Rules was a bizarre film, and though I did quite like the over-the-top gore and humor, I will say without Butterfield I probably wouldn't like it as much, even if Simon Pegg and Nick Frost were there. It just seems like Asa Butterfield is always the best part about a film, even when he's in a terrible one. But after watching Sex Education, I can safely say that this is probably his best work. The way he pulls off the slightly awkward yet wise beyond his years character while still keeping that charming naivety is captivating to watch, and when it bounces off of the quirky and zany characters of the show, it just works. Plus, his chemistry with literally anyone in the show is astounding. I think that's probably one of the reasons why he has the best relationships in the show, whether this be platonic or romantic. I mean, his romantic relationship with Maeve is the heart of the show, but his relationship with his mom is what glues it all together for me. In so many ways, the character of Otis has proven time and time again how great of a character he is and why he's the perfect coming-of-age romantic lead. But none exemplify this fact better than episode 3 of season 1 of the show. The episode that made Otis rise above any other coming-of-age romantic leads in recent memory, in my opinion. The episode that showed Otis Milburn as a true man. And look, you might think I'm exaggerating, and I might be a little bit, but for the most part, I mean what I said. One of the biggest reasons I fell in love with the show was because of Otis in episode 3, because he did something that shouldn't have been surprising, but it still was. He was selfless in this episode, genuinely heartfelt, selfless. He was there for Maeve when she needed him the most, and not in a cliched "I'm doing this because I like this character and I might have a chance with her" scenario that most romance stories commonly feature. No, he was genuinely there for her. He had no ulterior motives for doing what he did. He wasn't thinking how his actions would benefit himself. He was just truly selfless in this episode. And it's crazy to think about because the beginning of the episode was setting Otis up for disappointment. He had that wet dream about Maeve that messed with his head and made it awkward for him to act around her. When Maeve invited him, not knowing it was to pick her up after her abortion, Eric convinced him that it was a date. And his mindset going into it was that it was a date. He even dressed up like Casual Ham. Casual Ham! But when he got there and learned of the truth, he wasn't angry. He didn't act like he was hurt. No, he understood the situation and accepted it. He didn't make a big deal out of it, and he didn't try to make it all about himself, even though he could have. There was no judgment on his part. He just treated her like normal and made her feel comfortable. He was there for her and nothing else. He was truly selfless in this episode. And that's what made me love the character of Otis. And I know it's crazy to think that such a simple thing like being selfless, a concept that should be innate to every living person in this planet, is such a big deal for me, but oftentimes romance stories rarely see pure selfless acts like this happen. Most of them are because characters have ulterior motives or because the plot demands it. Pure, genuine selfless acts are hard to come by when it comes to romance stories. Even in real life, we rarely see selfless acts being committed, and when we do, it's always a big deal. Which is weird because the act of selflessness in a perfect society is the norm, not the exception. But this is real life, and that's just how things are. Otis Milburn in this episode is the epitome of what a real man should be. Someone who is selfless and genuinely cares about others. And even though Otis is an idealized fictional character in a fictional show about fictional teenagers, we should still strive to be as close to his ideals as we can possibly be. Because Otis Milburn is a true man. Those are the reasons why I think season 1 episode 3 of Sex Education is a perfect episode. One thing I will say about the show is that it has such a watchable quality to it. No matter how many times I watch it, it's still always enjoyable. The jokes still hit for me even after multitude viewings, and it's rare for me to have a show that I can do repeat viewings and still enjoy it like I'm seeing it for the first time again. Community and Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood are just a few examples of this. I love Sex Education. To me, this is my Netflix show. And what I mean by that is when I think of Netflix, I think Sex Education. For you, this could be Stranger Things, or Altered Carbon, or Umbrella Academy, or any other show you can possibly think of. For me, it's Sex Education, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It's a great show with a great cast and phenomenal writing and absurdly funny humor, perfect for a person such as myself. And if you're looking for the best the show can offer, look no further than episode 3 of season 1, an episode that I consider to be perfect.